Welcome to Space News from the Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts project at thunderbolts.info. In the previous episode, physicist Eugene Bagashov began his four-part presentation on the latest discoveries from NASA's New Horizons mission to the dwarf planet Pluto. The mission is one of many recent opportunities to test the predictions of the standard story of our solar system's history and origins. In this story, called the nebular hypothesis, the solar system formed through gravitational collapse in a cloud of gas and dust. Proponents of this theory propose that water ice was a primary building block for Pluto and its moons. But countless discoveries in recent years have proved highly problematic for the standard theory of our solar system's formation and history. Today, Eugene Bagashov explores the question of Pluto's composition and origins, and contrast the predictions of the standard theory versus those of the electric universe.
It is interesting that while describing the Pluto and Charon geological features, the New Horizons mission scientists have often referred to the, I quote, water ice bedrock, end of quote. Indeed, it seems they consider the water ice as a primary building block for both of those bodies, and probably the smaller satellites too, which to me seemed quite unusual. As far as I understood, the only reason for such an assumption is the nebular hypothesis of planetary formation, plus maybe a few other popular theories, which in their interpretation doesn't allow anything else to be present in those faraway regions of the solar system. It is then supposed that water ice might be as strong as rock in these harsh conditions, and is capable of maintaining form long enough to allow for the existence of these high mountains and deep valleys that we see on Pluto and Charon. Well, that might be the case, who knows? But why wouldn't we just suppose that it is just made of regular rock? I'd like to reiterate the thought from previous videos that if Pluto was formed in some other conditions, for example being a moon of a giant planet or simply being closer to the Sun or maybe some other star, then it might have different properties and represent something different than what is expected. One of the possible points in favor of big water ice abundance on Pluto and Charon is their density, which is around 1.8 grams per cubic centimeter, or roughly twice the water ice density. This is 2 to 3 times smaller than the density of terrestrial planets, and comparable to the density of the other well-studied dwarf planet Ceres. It is supposed to mean there's less rock and heavier things like metals, and more ice inside. But we know that in our system there are other bodies made of rock that also exhibit quite a low bulk density, comets for example. Philae Lander data has shown that it's the internal structure, namely the porosity, of the material that makes the comet 67P so light, not the high ice content. Basically it's something like pumice, and it completely agrees with the results of previous missions to comets, such as Stardust, that have shown that the comet nuclei exhibit materials that are formed in high temperature conditions. Same thing might be applicable to Pluto. In fact, the surface of Pluto shows only local patches of water ice spectral signature, but the surface of Charon shows signs of it almost everywhere. I think this ice that we see on Charon might actually be only a thin veneer that was created under the influence of solar wind, when its protons have joined with the oxygen atoms taken from the surface rocks, or maybe regolith, as is supposed in the electric comet hypothesis popular in the EU community. On Pluto, such process might be somewhat damped because of the presence of its atmosphere and also other contaminants, so to speak, by which I mean nitrogen, CO, CH4, ices, and also more complex organic molecules, the so-called tholins. All of those substances might mask the water ice layer on the surface of Pluto, if there is any. Now that I've mentioned tholins, let's look at what that is. They are the complex hydrocarbons that are supposed to be produced in the atmosphere of Pluto under the influence of solar radiation from more simple molecules such as methane and nitrogen. Tholins have quite a distinct brownish-red color that is readily recognized on the surface of Pluto. Basically, all the surface of the planet is slightly red and supposed to bear some tholin layering. But aside of that, we might see a very distinct dark equatorial band, which supposedly has a very rich tholin abundance. It might be that the equatorial position makes it easier for those materials to be formed under the more pronounced insolation. And I'd like to mention the very specific contrast of this equatorial band with bright Tombaugh regio, also situated on the equator. As I've mentioned in the previous part of this review, such a prominent anomaly probably should have a very special origins. What also caught my eye concerning this equatorial band and the map of Pluto in general is its striking similarity with the map of Saturn's moon Titan. It is interesting that not only does this body have the similar nitrogen atmosphere, but it also exhibits the rich tholin abundance and other hydrocarbons right in this dark band. Maybe the organic molecules on Pluto and Titan, and who knows, maybe even Earth, share similar origins. We also have a nitrogen atmosphere of all other things. And from the electric universe perspective, it is important to notice that scientists who were trying to recreate Titan-like tholins in the laboratory have actually succeeded in this endeavor by using electric discharges. Could it be that the atmosphere of Pluto as well as Titan is filled with electrical activity today, giving rise to those substances? Or maybe it is a sign of such an activity in the past. Let us look again at the encounter hemispheres of Pluto and Charon. Those are available in fairly good resolution and allow us to see a significant amount of very sharp valleys or rills, especially in the left side of Pluto image and almost throughout the whole visible part of Charon. In fact, earlier images of Charon's other side have shown that these channels almost encircle the whole body. Of course, we know this line of reasoning. When people see dendritic channel figures on Mars, for example, they might say that they were created by flowing water, although the current atmosphere cannot support it. Maybe the atmosphere was a bit thicker before, and so water could exist in large amounts in liquid state, etc., etc. But what do they say when they see dendritic channels on Pluto and Charon? What are the reasonable alternatives for electric excavation and deposition we have here? It seems that at this point, the only plausible explanation that New Horizons team have come up with is plate tectonics. So, as far as I understand, it is thought that those valleys might represent some sort of cracks in the outer shells of those bodies. I'm not a specialist in EDM, so I probably cannot comment on this much, but I just hope that one day we're going to get images of those regions with better resolution, and that would start a discussion on their possible electric origin.
For continuous updates on space news from the electric universe, stay tuned to thunderbolts.info.